Make us a channel of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us bring your love. Where there is injury, your pardon, Lord. And where there is doubt, true faith in you. O Master, grant that we may never seek so much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love with all our soul. Make us a channel of your peace. Where there is despair in life, let us bring hope. Where there is darkness, only light. Where there is sadness, ever joy. Make us a channel of your peace. It is in the pardoning that we are pardoned, in giving to all men that we receive, and in dying that we are born to eternal life. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So this is the prayer of St. Francis on Christmas Day, 2018. Happy Christmas to all. So this evening we're going to study Swami Vivekananda's lecture, Christ the Messenger. The whole lecture gives us a wonderful understanding of Swami Vivekananda's immense love for Christ and how he viewed him as a messenger. But then we have to ask, messenger of what? So every great soul that comes, described in this lecture as a huge wave that has its effect for thousands of years, comes with a message that is thrust on like the waves in the ocean for thousands and thousands of years to come. If we ask what is the historicity of Jesus, of course, the reply, and Swami Vivekananda had this discussion with his master. What if Rama doesn't exist? What if Krishna doesn't exist? Because something must have existed to last so many thousands of years, 5,000 years and odd. So something remarkable happened some 2,000 years ago that still has its lasting effect. And like everywhere, we find the purity of truth will find its own merit and will find its own momentum and its own impact. So in this lecture, he tells us a number of things. Firstly, that Christ was an Easterner, that all this in-depth spiritual insight really comes from the East. Because it is in the East that we find the speciality area of the ideas of renunciation, spirituality in depth, the whole idea that this world is fine, but there's something much deeper. And at the end of the day, we need to be realistic enough to assess and accept that this world that we live in is temporal and will give us ultimately sorrow. And that gives us every reason for renunciation. And so Jesus says, in answer to the question, what shall I do to gain eternal life? And love the Lord thy God with all your heart. See, all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength, nothing spared. And again he said, go sell all you have, give it unto the poor, and come follow me. But who's prepared to do it? So Swami Vivekananda points out the great, great depth of Jesus as a renunciant. He points out in this lecture also that should we follow him as a person, supposing somebody says to him, I like your message, I love your message, but I cannot accept you in any special way as a divinity. What will Jesus say? He say, go then, go on your way, take the message. He wouldn't insist that you follow him personally. It's the message that is important. He points out in this lecture that we only know a little bit about what he said, summarized really very beautifully on the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount is very significant because in those ancient days, any important message was delivered from a height. So the mountain is symbolic. Symbolic, the highest teaching is delivered from the highest point and to intimate disciples. But still he covered the whole range. Swami Vivekananda points out some beautiful approaches that Jesus has. I and the Father are one. The kingdom of heaven is within you. What wonderful teachings these are, and universal. Anybody who is seriously pursuing the inner life will be inspired by these words and find a universality about them. And so, what is the message that Christ brings? The message that Christ brings is the message that all messengers bring, but within their particular context. What is their context? Swami Vivekananda points out that there's a negative side to the messenger, because the messenger comes as a reaction to some negative condition which is already there. If we look at historically, 2,000 years ago, the land of Judea was occupied by the Romans. And so people, while they tolerated foreign rule, were thinking that a Messiah will be a military person that will overcome and overwhelm the Romans and bring back the kingdom of Judea. They were expecting something like that. Some noble king, no doubt, but Jesus was the exact opposite. Turn the other cheek. Love your neighbor as yourself. When he was asked, who is your neighbor? He gives a beautiful story of the Samaritan. The Samaritan were despised people, not orthodox. And so all these messengers, be it Christ, be it Buddha, be it Krishna, be it Krishna, they all had this reforming message from age to age. The Bhagavad Gita says, yada yada hi dharmasya, from age to age. I come from age to age. From time to time, there's a necessity for a huge wave to come along and reform everything completely. And as time goes on, the strength of that diminishes and a new impetus is required. So this beautiful lecture, Christ the Messenger, that Swami Vivekananda gives is inspiring, insightful, and only Swami Vivekananda can deliver this in such beautiful language, with such poetic phraseology that he does it. So I will just read some extracts from it, which highlight some of these points. He says in one place, we must bear another fact in mind. My view of the great prophet of Nazareth would be from the standpoint of the Orient. Many times you forget also that the Nazarene himself was an Oriental of Orientals. With all your attempts to paint him with blue eyes and yellow hair, you see how he says yellow hair, there's a little humor in it. Because you see, now in Africa, Christ is portrayed as dark-skinned, as black, see. But there you have the Romanesque views of Jesus as a blonde entity, Mary as something like a Roman goddess kind of figure, all of those kind of things. So he could have said blonde hair, but he says yellow hair. So whereas Nazarene was still an Oriental, all the similes in the imageries in which the Bible is written, the scenes, the locations, the attitudes, the groups, the poetry and symbol, speak to you of the Orient, of the bright sky, of the heat of the sun of the desert. How beautifully he paints a picture of this whole scene. Of the thirsty men and animals, of men and women coming with pitchers on their heads to fill them at the wells, of flocks, of the plowmen, of the cultivation that is going on around. Of the watermill and wheel, of the mill pond and the millstones. All these are seen today in Asia. This is not lost on Jesus, because he gives parables in that agricultural language, the language of the vineyard, somebody sowing a seed, the fig trees. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, see, that grows into this enormous tree. I was almost about to say banyan tree, because you see the similarities between the descriptions that we have. And then he goes on. It is intensely human in its sympathies, intensely natural, intensely artistic, therefore. The Greek lives entirely in this world, that is the world of the Greeks. But in contrast to that, he does not care to dream. Even his poetry is practical, talking still about the Greeks. His gods and goddesses are not only human beings, but intensely human. To have a different shift from that, from away from the physicality, is required the Oriental mind. And so still the Greeks love what is beautiful, but mind you, it is always external nature. Swami Vivekananda points out the beauty of the hills, of the snows, of the flowers, all of that is poetically beautiful and is reflected in modern Europe with its emphasis on the material. But it is really only in Asia that we find ideas about the inner life, not the external life. So there is another type in Asia, he says. Think of that vast, huge continent whose mountaintops go beyond the clouds, almost touching the canopy of heaven's blue, a rolling desert of miles upon miles where a drop of water cannot be found. This is why Muhammad portrayed heaven in terms of an oasis, because with the scarcity of water, with presence of deserts and so on and so forth, it was to make things so beautiful. It was portrayed as a land of water. The afterlife, paradise, is a land of water, a land of perfumes, a land of food, nourishment, not a land of deserts. So in the midst of all these surroundings, the Oriental love of the beautiful and of the sublime has developed itself in another direction, not the external direction, the internal direction. It looked inside and not outside. There's also the thirst for nature. There's also the same thirst for power. There's also the same thirst for excellence, the same idea of the Greek, the same idea of the barbarian, but it has extended over a larger circle. In Asia, even today, birth or color or language never makes a race. That which makes a race is its religion. We are all Christians, we are all Mohammedans, we are all Hindus, we are all Buddhists. No matter if a Buddhist is a Chinaman or is a man from Persia, they think that they are brothers because of their professing the same religions. Religion is the tie, unity of humanity. And then again, the Oriental, for the same reason, is a visionary, is a born dreamer. The beauties of the sun and moon and the stars and the whole earth are pleasant enough, but they are not sufficient for the Oriental mind. You see in this beautiful description of the Western Greek background and mind versus the Eastern mind and mentality, external and internal both having a value. But if you want religion and the religious ideas, they come from Asia. Then he goes on to say, we see therefore in the life of this great messenger, that is Christ, of life the first watchword, not this life, but something higher. And like the true son of the Orient, he is practical in that. You people of the West are practical in your own department, says Swami Vivekananda, in military affairs and in managing political circles and other things. Perhaps the Oriental is not practical in those ways, but he is practical in his own field. He is practical in religion. And if one preaches a philosophy tomorrow, there are hundreds who will struggle their best to make it practical in their lives. If a man preaches that standing on one foot would lead to one to salvation, he will immediately get 500 to stand on one foot. Their own, I imagine, not another, somebody else's. You may call it ludicrous, but mark you, beneath that is their philosophy, that intense practicality. In the West, plans of salvation mean intellectual gymnastics. This is one of the difficulties, really, with great thinkers, Western philosophers, particularly the German philosophers. In some cases, Hegel, for example, you'll be hard-pressed to understand exactly what they mean. So convoluted may the language be. So while these men are brilliant, there's no doubt, it lends itself to intellectual gymnastics. So that at the university level, when you study philosophy, you're expected to study all these intricate arguments and dialectics, which at the end of the day are all in the head, nothing in the heart. Then he goes on to say, so we find Jesus of Nazareth in the first place, the true son of the Orient, intensely practical. He has no faith in this evanescent world and all its belongings. No need of text torturing as is the fashion in the West in modern times. No need of stretching our texts until they will not stretch anymore. We find all the great disagreements, even intrafaith disagreements, because of disagreements about interpretation of texts and how you're orientated toward your particular theology. Texts are not India rubber, and even that has its limits. Now, no making of religion to pander the sense of vanity of the present day. Mark you, says Swamiji, let us all be honest. If we cannot follow the ideal, let us confess our weakness, but not degrade it. Let not any try to pull it down. One gets sick at heart at the different accounts of the life of the Christ that Western people give. I do not know what he was or what he was not. One would make him a great politician, another perhaps would make of him a great military general. It's become, even from Swami Vivekananda's day, it was common practice to challenge the interpretations of the Bible, to make Jesus a political leader that was persecuted by the Romans. And of course, to make a case that during the Jewish diaspora, that the Jews entering into the Greco-Roman world were afraid to say the Romans did this. It was the Jews that did it. So there's a case like that. But all of this is just superficial argumentation. They haven't got to the depth of who Christ was. And when Swami Vivekananda talks about the Eastern background, the deserts, the wells, and all of those kinds of things that he describes are thoroughly Eastern, we can, in a meditative way, imagine walking a mile with Christ by the Sea of Galilee, sitting, eating a meal there by the campfire, listening, drinking in his beautiful words, feeling the inspiration, internal upliftment in response to what he's saying, looking at his beautiful face as he speaks, no doubt shining with the light of knowledge, seeing how he had a different wiring, how he could then look at a lame man and his mere look or his touch would transform the physical condition of that person because he would have seen the internal perfection there already. This is the key to spiritual healing. You see God in there. Well, God is already full and free and perfect, no defect there. As soon as that insight is done in a thoroughly profound way, the external condition changes. It's simply molecules, and molecules are simply atoms, and atoms are simply vibrations. And vibrations in the Tantric Sankhya language are tanmatras, all just waves. How did he think? What was his wiring? We can have a whole meditation on any of these messengers. Since this is Christmas, we can meditate very easily on the birth and life of this great messenger and get inspired. How he walked among the crowds, how he wanted to get away from them sometimes, how he felt the need to go up in isolation and meditate in the early morning, how he said, "Can you not watch 1 hour with me?" All of these phrases we can pick up. So he goes on like this. The best commentary on the life of a great teacher is his own life, he says. The foxes have holes, the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man hath not where to lay his head. Just the language of a renunciant, a sadhu. That is what Christ says as the only way to salvation. He lays down no other way. Let us confess in sackcloth and ashes that we cannot do that. We still have fondness for me and mine, but still the ideal should be there. We want property, money, wealth. Woe unto us. Let us confess and not put to shame that great teacher of humanity. He had no family ties. But do you think that that man had any physical ideas in him? Do you think that this massive light, this God and not man, came down to earth to be the brother of animals? And yet people make him preach all kinds of things. He had no sex ideas. He was a soul, nothing but a soul, just working a body for the good of humanity. And that was all his relation to the body. In the soul, there is no sex, no gender, no male, no female. The disembodied soul has no relationship to the animal, no relationship to the body. The ideal may be far away beyond us, but never mind, keep to the ideal. Let us confess that it is our ideal, but we cannot approach it yet. It is wonderful to take these, even just saintly lives, not this highest of ideals, and study their birth, their life, and their death, how they died, and see if we can imitate them. See, in the Bhagavad Gita, we find this reference in terms of somebody of steady wisdom, sthita prajna. How does he walk? How does he sit? How does he behave? Can we imitate that? Can we imitate that as closely as possible? Even knowing we may fall short, but still, can we pick up in a very closely observed way all these details that a godly person, male or female, has? That is why the Imitation of Christ is such a wonderful book. Because when we pick that up, we see the whole theme is, how can we practice the presence of God by imitating that in every way, in prayer life, in working life, in waking life, in every respect. And so it goes on. But never mind, keep to the ideal, he says. Let us confess that it's our ideal, but we cannot approach it yet. He had no other occupation in life, no other thought except that one, that he was a spirit. He was a disembodied, unfettered, unbound spirit. Not only so, but he, with his marvelous vision, had found that every man and woman, whether Jew or Gentile, whether rich or poor, whether saint or sinner, was the embodiment of the same undying spirit as himself. And he gave his message structured so everyone could understand. Pray to your Father in heaven is a dualistic message. I am the vine, you are the branches, is a qualified non-dualistic approach. Vishishta Veda. I and the Father are one is non-dualism. Without contradiction, he could teach this to everybody according to their understanding and stature. That's a great gift of a true teacher, that you won't stick on an incomprehensible level, that you'll come down and assist people. Why? Because you see the same undying entity in everyone. Therefore, he says, Swamiji says, the one work his whole life showed was to call upon them to realize their own spiritual nature. Give up, he says, these superstitions, dreams that you are low and that you are poor. Don't forget, earlier he talks about the environment. He talks about how a messenger comes because there is a decline in Dharma. Swami Vivekananda doesn't exactly put it that way, but we can put it that way, that there is a decline. In Jesus' time, not only was the Roman occupation there, but the religion of the day was all ritualistic. It was all to do with whether you pick something up on a Sabbath or whether you don't. The letter of the law, not the spirit of the law. And he radically, his disciples picked corn on the Sabbath. It was against the law, the religious law. And he was criticized for that, see. Deemed to be some kind of rebel, but you have to have that rebellious streak in you to be a good reformer, to get to the heart, the spirit, not the letter of the law. So superstitious dreams that you are low and that you are poor, no, he didn't have that. But subsequently, followers of Jesus put that and stressed that. And Vivekananda says in a different place, the greatest sin is call yourself a sinner. Think not that you are trampled upon and tyrannized over as if you are slaves, for within you is something that can never be tyrannized over, never be trampled upon, never be troubled, never be killed. You are all sons of God, immortal spirit. No, he declared, the kingdom of heaven is within you. I and my Father are one. Dare you stand up and say, not only that I am the Son of God, but I shall also find in my heart of hearts that I and my Father are one. That was what Jesus of Nazareth said. He never talks of this world and of this life. He has nothing to do with it, except that he wants to get hold of the world as it is, give it a push, a drive forward and onward until the whole world has reached to the effulgent light of God. Until everyone has realized his spiritual nature, until death is vanished and misery is banished. We have read, says Swami Vivekananda further, the different stories that have been written about him. We know the scholars and their writings and the higher criticism, and we know all that has been done by study. We are not here, says he, to discuss how much of the New Testament is true. We are not here to discuss how much of that life is historical. It does not matter at all whether the New Testament was written within 500 years of his birth, nor does it matter even how much of that life is true, but there is something behind it, something we want to imitate. To tell a lie, you have to imitate the truth. And that truth is a fact. You cannot imitate that which never existed. You cannot imitate that which can never be perceived. But there must have been a nucleus, a tremendous power that came down, a marvelous manifestation of spiritual power. And of that we are speaking. It stands there. You see how scholars today are arguing whether about the historicity of Jesus, arguing about whether because the Gospels were written so many years after, it was hearsay, who recorded this, who recorded that. He dismisses it in one go and says, something marvelous happened here. Something inward happened here. Something spiritual happened here. You're arguing over all the peripheries. Who wrote what and when. It doesn't make any difference. It's the spiritual power, the manifestation of the spiritual power. Therefore, he says, we are not afraid of all the criticisms of the scholars. If I, as an Oriental, he says, have to worship Jesus of Nazareth, there's only one way left to me. That is to worship him as God and nothing else. Have we no right to worship him in that way? Do you mean to say, if we bring him down to our own level and simply pay him a little respect as a great man, why should we worship at all? Our scriptures say, these great children of life who manifest the light themselves, who are light themselves, they being worshipped become, as it were, one with us, and we become one with them. Then he continues, for you see, in three ways man perceives God. At first, the undeveloped intellect of the uneducated man sees God as far away, up in the heavens somewhere, sitting on a throne as a great judge. He looks upon him as fire, as a terror. Now that is good, for there is nothing bad in it. I just make a comment there. You see, spiritual development is exactly the same as social development. In social development, a child is told, do this, don't do that. By the age of two outstanding things are told, no and don't touch. And still the child will look at you and put the hand out and still go toward your glass vase. The child is learning all the time, but the only way to control a child ultimately is through a short-term way of motivation, a kind of punishment and reward system. Even if it's as mild as the mother saying, I'll tell your father, or something like that. The father is a threat. The mother is all loving and so on. So reward and punishment become a way of controlling and disciplining. So there's a place for that also in religion. But there comes a time when we understand there's a lawgiver. God is a lawgiver, because in our social development, we understand that we have to obey the law. If we don't, there'll be consequences. If you put it in Christian theological terms, you can have an eternal ice cream in heaven or get roasted on the barbecue of hell. But that's still very immature. And we have to go beyond the line, not just cut off there, draw a line and leave it there. No. And so real spirituality begins when we take personal responsibility. With the red Atmanatvanam, that passage is there in the Bhagavad Gita, raise yourself up by yourself or lower yourself by yourself. You are your own best friend, your own worst enemy. Take personal responsibility. Just as a student, when they get toward the tertiary education, not even that, secondary education, they start saying, nobody forced me to study now. I myself voluntarily do it. I see other students there and they want to do well. I also want to do well. I myself want to do it. So I set up my own study program and do it. In spiritual life, there's a difference between the phrasing spiritual life and religion in the sense of judge, lawgiver, etc. It's a good start. Just as it's a good start to have law when you're small, to have do's and don'ts, to have a system of reward and punishment, but ultimately self-motivation gives you a huge momentum, more momentum than all the other systems, when you do something voluntarily. So he looks upon him as a fire, as a terror. Now that is good, for there's nothing bad in it. You must remember that humanity travels not from error to truth, but from truth to truth. It may be, if you like it better, from lower truth to higher truth, but never from error to truth. Suppose you start from here and travel toward the sun in a straight line. From here, the sun looks only small in size. Suppose you go forward 1,000,000 miles. The sun will be much bigger, he says. At every stage, the sun will become bigger and bigger. Suppose 20,000 photographs have been taken of the same sun from different standpoints. These 20,000 photographs will all certainly differ from one another. But can you deny that each is a photograph of the same sun? So all forms of religion, high or low, are just different stages toward the eternal state of light, which is God himself. Some embody a lower view, some are higher, and that is all the difference. Therefore, the religions of the unthinking masses all over the world must be and have always been of a God who is outside of the universe, who lives in a heaven, who governs from that place, who is a punisher of the bad and rewarder of the good, and so on. As man advanced spiritually, he began to feel that God was everywhere, omnipresent, that he must be in him, that he must be in the other, he must be everywhere, that he was not a distant God, but clearly the soul of all souls. As my soul moves my body, even so is God the mover of my soul, soul within soul. And a few individuals who had developed enough and were pure enough went still further, and at last found God. As the New Testament says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And they found at last that they and the Father were one. And that really is the essence of all spiritual practice. A religious practice, spiritual practice, is cleaning the mind, purifying the mind. The heart is Oriental speak for mind. Once we purify that, and as the yogis will say, as the mind, the waves in the mind get calmed, the truth self-evidently appears from within. It gets revealed. It reveals itself. All our job is cleaning the mind. So blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And the kingdom of heaven is within you. Where goest thou to seek for the kingdom of God? Asked Jesus of Nazareth, when it is there within you. Cleanse the spirit, and it is there. It is already yours. How can you get what is not yours? It is yours by right. You are the heirs of immortality, sons of the eternal Father. Is there any messenger that had a different message? No. Why are these different religions fighting, therefore? The same message is being delivered everywhere. This is the great lesson of the messenger. And I add, myself, all messages. And another, which is the basis of all religions, is renunciation. How can you make the spirit pure? By renunciation. You ask what is the essence of the Gita. Sri Ramakrishna says, Tyaga, Tyaga, Tyaga. If you repeat Gita, 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 you get Tyaga, Tyaga, Tyaga. A rich young man asked Jesus, Good master, what shall I do that I may inherit eternal life? And Jesus said unto him, One thing that thou lackest. Go thy way, sell everything you have, all thou hast, and give it to the poor. And thou shalt have treasures in heaven, and come, take up thy cross and follow me. And he was sad at that saying, and went away grieved. For he had great possessions. We are all more or less like that, says Swami. The voice is ringing in our ears day and night. In the midst of our pleasures and joys, in the midst of worldly things, we think that we have forgotten everything else. Then comes a moment's pause, and the voice rings in our ears. Give up all that thou hast and follow me. Whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whoever shall lose his life for my sake shall find it. For whoever gives up this life for his sake finds the life immortal. In the midst of all our weakness, there is a moment of pause, and the voice rings. Give up all that thou hast, give it to the poor, and follow me. This is lost in many Christian sects. You'll find that wealth is stressed. There's nothing wrong with being rich, but particularly in rich countries, wealthy countries, that seems to be a Christian message. Nowhere will you find it in these texts or anything from the lips of Jesus. Quite the opposite. And so, this is the one ideal he preaches, and this has been the ideal preached by all the great prophets of the world: renunciation. What is meant by renunciation? That there is only one ideal in morality: unselfishness. Be selfless. The ideal is perfect unselfishness. Swami Vivekananda even says that if you have sincerity, absolute truthfulness, and complete selflessness, it doesn't matter if you believe in God or not. You'll arrive at the same destiny. These two qualities are required. Be selfless. This ideal is perfect unselfishness. When a man is struck on the right cheek, he turns the left also. When a man's coat is carried off, he gives away his cloak also. We should work in the best way we can without dragging the ideal down. Here is the ideal. When a man has no more self in him, no possession, nothing to call me or mine, when he has given himself up entirely, destroyed himself as it were, in that man is God himself. For in him, self-will is gone, crushed out, annihilated. That is the ideal man. We cannot reach that state yet let us worship the ideal and slowly struggle to reach the ideal, though maybe with faltering steps. It may be tomorrow, or it may be 1,000 years hence, but that ideal has to be reached, for it is not only the end, but also it is the means. To be unselfish, perfectly selfless, is salvation itself. To be unselfish, perfectly selfless, is salvation itself. For the man within dies, and God alone remains. One more point, says Swamiji. All the teachers of humanity are unselfish. Suppose Jesus of Nazareth was teaching, and a man came and told him, "What you teach is beautiful. I believe that it is the way to perfection, and I am ready to follow it. But I do not care to worship you as the only begotten Son of God." What would be the answer of Jesus of Nazareth? This is a very important question today. Very well, my brother. Follow the ideal and advance in your own way. I do not care whether you give up the credit for the teaching or not. I am not a shopkeeper. I do not trade in religion. I only teach truth, and truth is nobody's property. Nobody can patent truth. Truth is God himself. Go forward. A listener may say, "But you just put words in Jesus' mouth." No, the basis is he was unselfish, had no ego. And the followers want to give him an ego, perhaps, but he himself never had it. What kind of teacher would he be of a supreme quality if he had any kind of ego with him and says, "Follow me personally as an individual"? No, it's the teaching. But what the disciples say nowadays, no matter whether you practice the teachings or not, do you give credit to the man? If you credit the master, you will be saved. If not, there is no salvation for you. And thus the whole teaching of the master is degenerated, and all the struggle and fight is for the personality of the man. They do not know that in imposing that difference, they are, in a manner, bringing shame to their very man. They want that very man they want to honor, the very man that would have shrunk with shame from such an idea. What did he care if there was not one man in the world that remembered him or not? He had to deliver his message, and he gave it. If somebody delivers a message to your door, you don't highlight the messenger necessarily. The message itself is the valuable thing. And he had 20,000 lives. He would give them all up for the poorest man in the world. If he had to be tortured millions of times for 1,000,000 despised Samaritans, and if for each one of them the sacrifice of his own life would be the only condition of salvation, he would have given his life. And all this without wishing to have his name known, even to a single person. Quiet, unknown, silent would he work, just as the Lord works. Pray to your Father in secret is what he says. Everything was personal. Everything was intimate. Spiritual life in depth. Why? What is the origin of this superstition? What superstition? Well, he will tell you that you may be a perfect man, perfectly unselfish, but unless you give the credit to our teacher, to our saint, say the followers, it is of no avail. Why? What is the origin of the superstition? This ignorance. The disciple thinks that the Lord can manifest himself only once, and there lies the whole mistake. Sorry, you see, one of the first occasions I met Swami Vivekananda. So he said in a fun to me, he said, I feel sorry for your Christians. Why is that, Maharaj? He says, because your God can only have one son. Ours can have as many sons as he likes. So God manifests himself to you in man. But throughout nature, what happens once must have happened before, and must happen in the future. There is nothing in nature which is not bound by law. And that means that whatever happens once must go on and must have been going on and on. In India, they have the same idea of the incarnations of God. One of their great incarnations, Krishna, whose grand sermon, Bhagavad Gita, some of you might have read, says, though I am unborn of changeless nature and lord of beings, yet subjugating my prakriti, my nature, cosmic nature, I come into being by my own maya. Whatever virtue subsides and immorality prevails, then I embody myself forth for the protection of good, for the destruction of the wicked, and for the establishment of Dharma, a kind of harmony that knits everything together. I come into being in every age. Why just once? Why not whenever there's a distressful situation? Come in. Whenever the world goes down, the Lord comes to help it forward, and so he does from time to time and place to place. In another passage, says Swamiji, he speaks to this effect. Wherever thou findest a great soul of immense power and purity struggling to raise humanity, know that he is born of my splendor, that I am there working through him. Let us therefore find God not only in Jesus of Nazareth, but in all the great ones that have preceded him, in all that came after him, and all that are yet to come. Our worship is unbounded and free. They are all manifestations of the same infinite God. They are all pure and unselfish. They struggled and gave up their lives for us, poor human beings. They each and all suffer vicarious atonement for every one of us, and also for all that are to come after. He concludes his lecture in this way. In a sense, you are all prophets. Every one of you is a prophet, bearing the burden of the world on your own shoulders. Have you ever seen a man, have you ever seen a woman who is not quietly, patiently bearing his or her little burden of life? The great prophets were giants. They bore a gigantic world on their shoulders. Compared with them, we are pygmies, no doubt. Yet we are doing the same task. In our little circles, in our little homes, we are bearing our little crosses. There's no one so evil, no one so worthless, but he has to bear his own cross. But with all our mistakes, with all our evil thoughts and evil deeds, there's a bright spot somewhere. There's still somewhere the golden thread through which we are always to touch with the divine. For know for certain that the moment the touch of the divine is lost, there would be annihilation. And because none can be annihilated, there is always somewhere in our heart of hearts, however low and degraded we may be, a little circle of light which is in constant touch with the divine. He concludes with a small prayer. Our salutations go to all the past prophets whose teachings and lives we have inherited. Whatever might have been their race, clime, or creed, our salutations go to all those godlike men and women who are working to help humanity, whatever be their birth, color, or race. Our salutations to those who are coming in the future, living gods, to work unselfishly for our descendants. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.